Hi, so I'm Mark Maier. I'm the current chair of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club Mountaineering section. I'd like to welcome you to our little series on Carderock Beta. Carderock, because people have been climbing here for many decades, because the quality of the rock is really sort of questionable out here. It's a type of schist that you can't really feel confident about any kind of trad gear holding. It's international park area. These days, really, you don't go out and put a lot of bolts in here. There's a few old bolts floating around, but they're pretty old, not something you'd want to trust anymore. The cliffs are short. It's a top roping area. It's a top roping and bouldering area.
It's important to know the beta because there are very limited different structures in the rock. My name is John Gregory. I've been climbing here at Carderock for 44 years. So I started in 1975. This rock is a schist medium with quartz inclusions. And the root is basically created out of those. So it's not like granite where you just approach an area and you can pretty much figure your way through it. It's a very precise medium.
You walk up to something like this and you look at these quartz extrusions and you think, yeah, this has got to be pretty easy and some nice face climbing. And it is until you feel how slick the edges of some of these are. Oftentimes this kind of stuff is very, very tricky. It'll look like the climbing is easy until you actually get on it, and then you find that your feet slick off it, your fingers slick off it, even at a rather modest angle because the level of polish on the rock. And because it's been used so long, the climbs have become very, very line, hold, etc. specific. You know, if you've gone to other areas around the country, they're like this. They're basically bouldering and top roping. You know that when somebody describes some climb, has been there for a long time, they'll tell you, yeah, well, you go up the line here between these things, but you can't touch that hold, but you can touch that hold, but you have to use that one, you can't use that other one. And then the next time something breaks off and it's a new climb. That makes these sort of places very beta intensive.
You know, the saying for years was, if you can climb here, you can climb better anywhere else. And chiefly that's footwork.
And we thought that this would be a really interesting project to kind of document some of these interesting project routes, the kind of things that people will work on for years, with a video showing how different people climb them, what the hold sequences are, and maybe that'll kind of open people's eyes to some interesting and complex techniques that you might use to get over some of these problems. So Carderock is arguably one of the most historic climbing areas in the United States. It's a relatively modest little outcropping of cliffs along the Potomac River, just outside of Washington, D.C. People have been climbing here since, as best we can tell, since the 1920s for sure. And the first marker is this climb here on the wall, which is called Herbie's Horror. Obviously named after a Herbie from way times back.
If you hug the rock, you are lost. This climb is reminiscent of Herbie's Horror.
When your foot begins a shaking and you think you're gonna fall, and what you're hanging on to isn't any good at all, and there's nothing quite within your reach that's half as good to you, that's the time you get the Herbie's Horror Blues. Oh, the Herbie's Horror Blues make you feel so low, and you wonder what it is that makes you fall off so, and you tear your hair in deep despair and blame it on your shoes. But we all know it's the Herbie's Horror Blues.
Several pioneers in American climbing did some of their early work here at Carderock. You have names like Paul Brandt and Don Hubbard and Chris Scarides and others who put up a number of really interesting routes here and developed a lot of interesting techniques. Arguably, the hardest climb in the United States was once at Carderock. Granted, those days are long past now, but certainly at one time, you would have thought of it as a hotbed of American climbing.
This was the center of the climbing culture of Washington. It started here during World War II, just before World War II, and then it kind of bloomed a little bit during World War II because people could not travel. So an entire culture was then built around this one place because they could get here. About 1980, we realized that the pioneers were dying and we couldn't talk to them anymore. So then the question was, okay, how do we try to capture the information, the stories behind how this happened and the descriptions of the process, and that got to be harder and harder as they were leaving. Second, in the 70s, the oil shale boom expanded the economy of the Front Range in Colorado enormously. So that suddenly there were real jobs out there. And people who stayed here only because they needed a job here didn't have to stay here anymore. So most of the developers of this area in the 70s are gone. They moved away. So between disappearing and moving away and simply aging out of the sport, they're all gone. So those are reasons that we didn't, we figured, okay, there should be some description. So it was the source of the original 1980 guidebook. The climbs represent the inherited culture of the people who climbed here before. And so if they put in a climb, call it a certain grade, then if you're not on that, then you're not doing that climb. It used to not be a big deal, you could communicate it by word of mouth. But now you can't because all those people are gone.
Potomac Appalachian Trail Club Mountaineering Section has been involved here essentially since the beginning. Part of that was probably by chance. The Potomac Appalachian Trail Club had been formed to build and support the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail doesn't, of course, run right through here. It's considerably to the west of here. But this is the population center. This is where the people were. This is where you were able to get people together to go out and work on the trail, to organize them. And when people started trying to organize some climbing, and of course that was very much the days of club-based, group organization-based climbing in the United States, it seemed very natural to use the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club as a nucleus for that. So that's persisted ever since. We've been involved in this area, particularly stewardship of this area. There's nothing terribly official about it, but certainly people in the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club Mountaineering section feel a lot of sort of proprietary interests in Carderock. It's been a place where people will climb after work, climb on weekends, teach classes, learn to belay, learn to rappel, learn basic techniques. Some very interesting, some pretty tough face climbs, but examples of climbs where the beta is really an issue because many of these climbs are defined by climbing precisely in between or on particular features. People have worked out on top rope very specific sequences on things. And if you want to do some of the historic climbs out here, either you have to kind of go back and work all that out from scratch, or somebody's got to tell you where the beta really goes. And there's a few people, of course, who really know the beta great out here.
The wedge itself was the test piece of the 1970s before we got sticky shoes. Reach into the face there for an undercling. The nose now is called 10B. Under the roof with the left, high step. There you go. Right hand just above the left hand.
why that climb goes up in between those two little cracks and not touching anything on either side, or why on some other one you can put your feet on one wall and your hands on another wall, but you can't put your feet where your hands are or your feet are, because, well, that's what the specific little details of that climb are.
For me, it's there's a very strong connection after all this time. It was a very special place for an era of climbing that started with there was only trad climbing, and now there are lots of different kinds of climbing. This place, the skills transfer to any of those disciplines. So it's not some place that's highly specific. And that's what I hope other people can get, is that you can develop your skills here. So it's the ability to apply what you learn here to the greater ranges. That's what's really important.
We have a lot of sort of proprietary interest in this place. People come out here a lot. Because it's kind of a historic area, I think sometimes maybe people don't pay as much attention to the interesting challenges out here. They want to head out somewhere where they can go sport climbing. But there are a lot of challenges here. And maybe by opening up some of the history, some of the beta, some of the interesting techniques, some of the interesting climbs that don't get very rarely, in part because people just don't know what the sequences involved in them are, or even that it's particularly there, we can maybe have a little renaissance of climbing here at Carderock, and people come back and find interest in things that they'd otherwise passed up.